Hi, my name is Ty, and tonight I want to kick this off with a tale of two different companies. One, a historically very successful firm that buys best in class software to meet every possible technology challenge. They use Microsoft 365, the entire suite, Teams, SharePoint for file sharing, for communication, Zoom for video conferencing, Vonage for telephony and their call centers. And they purchased Salesforce Ultimate license for their CRM. And they've bought pretty much every bell and whistle that their CTO thought they might need. And their team really appreciates the technology forward approach, but historically, they've always been the people that bring in the business. So at the end of the day, there's probably some inconsistent adoption of every single feature. I then want to talk about a different type of firm, a nimble, fast growth startup that uses G Suite for just about everything they can: email, teleconferencing, and file sharing. They use Slack for internal messaging, Zoho as a CRM, and Twilio for calls and text. This startup has only had a seed round of funding so far, so their CTO has taken a much more bootstrapped approach to her tech stack. And even though it's pretty lean, she has built it much more so around what the salespeople have told her makes their customers really happy. So which company do you think has built a tech stack that will ultimately make their sales team more efficient? So we're in such a strange moment in history right now, and the Digital Adoption Summit could not have happened at a more prescient time for what's going to be needed in tomorrow's company. The COVID-19 epidemic has exacerbated the necessity for technology professionals to strategically and soberly evaluate their own sales tech stack. The Economist pointed out last month in an article entitled "The Changes COVID-19 is Forcing Onto Business" that current pandemic will shift the focus onto the infusion of data-enabled services into ever more aspects of our life. But if you walk away from one thing from this presentation, I hope it's this: digital transformation needs to be about people first and technology second. And it doesn't matter what your budget is, your tech stack is only as valuable as the people who use it. My name is Tigh Loughhead, and I run a MarTech consultancy here in downtown Manhattan called Rent Boost. We are a registered Salesforce consulting partner, as well as a Google certified ads partner agency. And we help firms evaluate and better use marketing and sales technology and train their stakeholders how to optimize its efficiency within their organization. And thinking back to my own professional experience, virtually my entire career has been about helping businesses and sometimes dragging them into digital transformation. I started my career in the digital advertising agency world, and I quickly learned that I could automate a lot of what I was doing with marketing, not to programmatically serve the most amount of ads at scale, but to deliver more relevant, timely, contextual content through the channels that my customer wanted most. And I realized that the same principles of process automation really applied to the sales side of business as well. And I transitioned to helping also enable sales teams to build inside sales mechanisms and to help to choose the right technology to support those processes. And I work a lot in Salesforce these days, but the more I work in technology, the more agnostic I am about any particular software solution. And the more I find myself focusing on how much a company understands their consumer and how well they can articulate a sales process. So I want to thank everybody again for joining me today. I am really excited to be here tonight at the Digital Adoption Summit. I'm going to cover a lot, but primarily I'm going to talk about two things this evening. First, I'm going to talk about how technology is potentially dangerous if you don't get buy-in. Secondly, I'm going to talk about a methodology for making sales a stakeholder long-term in the tech stack itself. To kick things off, I want to stress not how necessary, which I think is something we all know by now, but also how simultaneously dangerous and expensive digital transformation can be. In 2019, just about a year ago, North Carolina State University's Enterprise Risk Management Institute partnered with a management consulting firm called Protaviti to release results from a survey they conduct annually about the state of risk in business. They interview about 1,000 C-level technology executives. And what they found is that digital transformation just last year had skyrocketed to the #1 perceived risk for companies, up from a position of about 10th back in 2018. As existing operations and legacy technology infrastructure pose a risk to companies that can't transform quickly enough to compete against companies that were born digital, to quote a Wall Street Journal article that references this study. And digital transformation efforts largely failed leading up to this year. McKinsey also released a pretty monumental report last year suggesting that out of the $1.3 trillion invested in digital transformation initiatives the previous year, as much as $900 million of the $1.3 trillion went to waste or did not meet their targets. And that is just really mind-boggling. And those numbers are pretty incredible when we're talking about 30% success rate by companies' own admission implementing and adopting new technology. But I see this happen all the time. And I have a professional example that I can point to that might help illustrate why. I work with a pretty awesome company that has a global presence, and they'll remain anonymous, but well, they'll remain anonymous because I absolutely love their product and I love their brand. And I had the opportunity to meet and hang out with their CEO at Dreamforce a couple of years ago, and I was absolutely elated to find out that they had purchased Salesforce as a CRM, which is another product that I am very enthusiastic about. Now, I was not involved in their actual implementation, but they did ask me to help roll out a training plan. And as their plans progressed, their technical requirements changed without any input from sales or their customers. And what, from my perspective, started out as a 2-week training session changed from that to a 1-day in-class teaching session to an hour-long video. And by the time that Salesforce was actually deployed last year, everyone I knew on the sales side was pretty frustrated by the project that by that time, adoption was almost doomed, coming in about a year, like actually being deployed about a year after they had announced that they would go live. And I met with the CEO around that time last year. He came through New York City, and he told me, quote unquote, that he was not going to invest one more dollar in software until that software started making the company money. And I think that says so much about the state of tech efficiency. And this is obviously a pretty cautionary tale, but I think it's an all too frequent example of how technology can be incredibly costly and dangerous if you only think about the tool delivering something of value, not focusing on how it can help the people and the customers it's supposed to be serving. So I think we've all made, software purchases that we may not absolutely need or didn't wind up delivering as much value as the marketing or the account rep said it would. So let's change tact a little bit and talk about how you should go about thinking about the tech you do need, and especially those considerations that will drive long-term efficiency for sales. So after introducing new tools to professionals for most of my career, I think it's always a challenge to bring new tech to salespeople, especially if they've been successful in the past, and even more so in spite of themselves if they happen to have made a lot of money without some sort of proscriptive sales methodology or any supplementary software tools that could now seem to threaten someone's livelihood or at least their value proposition. But as a CTO or a CIO or a sales manager, I think you need to take a massive step back before you think about products or platforms immediately, and consider these three fundamental questions about your business, and in this order. So number one, what is the customer journey experience that we want to achieve? Number two, what are the steps in your sales process that work best to achieve this ideal customer journey? And number three, what tools best support that particular sales process? So we're going to start with the customer, as I think this consideration is something that is considered outside of the purview of information technology. I think the salesperson's knowledge of a customer is often forgot throughout the entire solutioning process. And all too often, specific tools are chosen to solve for siloed challenges and opportunities. And although the underlying goal, it might be to drive sales, I think it's really imperative that you start with the question, what do we want our buyer's journey to be? And, additional questions that might help frame this question are, who are our who is our customer? Who are they? Where do they live? How do they consume information? Where do they work? What are their challenges and objections? And how do they currently interact with our brand and our salespeople? And if you don't have a market research firm at your disposal on retainer or budget to hire one, you need to have that conversation with sales. In a perfect world, though, how would a customer choose your product or your service on their terms, and what would that experience look like? And this customer question, like I said, it often gets lost in the tech evaluation stage. But I think we've heard more and more and more about customer-centric companies, especially over the last 5 years. And you hear more and more about this every day. And I could list a whole bunch of different stats about how companies that really care about that customer journey, about customer experience, are by and large the companies that are performing today and performing better than companies that don't. According to Gartner, 89% of companies now expect to compete largely on the basis of customer service. Bain and Company released a report showing that companies that excelled in customer service outgrew their market share by 4 to 8% annually. Companies that use customer journey maps reduce their cost of service by 15 to 20% on average, said another report by McKinsey. And it's just becoming so much more imperative that we examine that as the first fundamental question about using any platform. Number two, what are the steps in your sales process that work best to achieve that customer journey? Now, I've never met a salesperson who did not think that they were very unique, but I've also never met an incredibly successful salesperson that didn't work a process over and over and over again. And every sales process is reducible to a series of steps that can be quantified. Now, there are a number of sales methodologies out there, but understanding and articulating what's the most effective to drive not necessarily sales, but customer success will be crucial to choosing what technology salespeople need to do their jobs and communicate effectively with prospects. And this is where I want to bring this back to the customer outcome, not necessarily the sales outcome. Unless you have a monopoly on your industry, long-term growth will really be dictated by your customer experience, not the short-term revenue of monthly sales. Only after asking the first two questions about customer journeys and sales processes that achieve them should we ask the third question: which sales tools best support our sales processes? So now that we're in the evaluation phase, we need to flesh out a few things. How will this product impact prospecting? How will it enable salespeople to do their job better? And how do we measure both of those results so that we can optimize this strategy over time? And by prospecting, I simply mean, does this tool drive a deal forward in our pipeline? This could be communication, it could be a scheduling tool, it could be a qualification aid, or a database. But the necessity should be viewed by how much value that platform creates in executing each step in that effective sales process. The next thing to consider is, how will this product enable a salesperson to do their job? And how will the firm onboard and continue to measure adoption? I read an article with a great headline based on an Ipsos market research study that read, "Small businesses like new technology, but don't use it." And I think this is a major weakness at many different firms that lack training, lack process and product documentation, a wiki for best practices, or education why using a certain platform a specific way is actually beneficial to an individual salesperson. And this is something I think more and more businesses that I work with today are finding a benefit in, using knowledge-based platforms like Confluence or Guru. And while documentation can seem like additional overhead, I think it's essential that salespeople have training. Maybe it's in a classroom, maybe it's by video. Maybe it's a one-to-one shadowing system. Because unless technology itself creates a value add in a salesperson's day-to-day, they're probably not going to be totally on board. While everyone implicitly understands the long-term value of a CRM, there's always going to be pushback doing data entry. So it's absolutely essential that the product is mapped to being, or possibly even required to use to execute that sales process. I mean, if you are an account exec at Salesforce and you don't actually log what's going on in the platform, you won't get credit on the deals that close, and you won't get paid. And from my perspective, that's a pretty big motivator. And from a technology standpoint, there's always a delicate balance between education, inspiration, incentivization, and enforcement, but enabling adoption is critical to that product's success. And just to drive that point home, Forbes Insights released a report a couple years ago showing that 3/4 of firms that outpaced their revenue goals had a clearly defined sales enablement function identified within their business. So lastly, before making that purchase, I think it's important to define the KPIs to measure your pipeline and enablement, and iteratively measure the impact the solution is having on both prospecting and how comprehensively the sales team is actually using it. So the actual process itself and the customer journey can be improved upon. It was almost a decade ago that Mark Andreessen said, "Software is eating the world." And that quote was attributed to sort of a massive challenge to traditional companies, traditionally non-tech companies, to start behaving a little bit more like tech companies. And today, SaaS tools exist to support just about every single business function. But especially in the enterprise world, those shiny tools rarely come cheap. And so I hope you remember a couple of the things that we talked about today. We started off talking about the massive risk that technology purchases can be without a clearly defined strategy. If you just think about the function of the tool itself and not about the people who use them and who will benefit. And secondly, we talked about a methodology for making sales and your customer a stakeholder in the tech itself. You can buy pretty much any type of technology, but your ability to adapt in an increasingly digital world will be how well you understand your customer, will be based on how well you understand your customer, how well you can effectively articulate a sales process, and only then how to choose technology that supports that process. So before I leave, I want to thank you for your time. But before I wish you a good night, I want to challenge you to do an assessment. And this can be a technical analysis or measurement or a questionnaire, but find out how much a particular product has been adopted within your org. Then measure its impact on progressing deals throughout a pipeline. Then consider if an alternative solution would outweigh the benefit of simply adopting the product more and figure out how to get there instead. The results should say a whole lot about the efficiency of your tech stack. Thank you.